Welcome, everyone. This is Glenda Dawson, and you're watching Glenda's Dragons Den. We're here on Wednesday night, like we always are. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's here every single week, following us, sharing this show, and also joining us in the chat. Again, if you have any questions for our guest or any comments, please participate in the chat and we will try to reach any questions that there are. Now, tonight we have a phenomenal guest, Jerry Kantor, who is a homeopathic specialist, who is licensed, by the way, in a state right here in the United States, which is something that is very rare and high honor. So welcome, Jerry. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, Glenda. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. And I'm sorry for the tech difficulty that we seem to be having today. I guess that Mercury retrograde is hitting us too. Definitely. So tell our audience about you and how you got here.
Yeah. Well, I'm a licensed homeopath. My background is in traditional Chinese medicine. Academically, I studied philosophy at the PhD level, and I dropped out of a program for that. So I'm very much drawn to philosophical ideas, provided that they have consequences. I don't just like ideas that just get floated around for discussion. And the philosophies behind Chinese medicine and homeopathy have consequences. Both these forms of medicine are based on deep principles, which are parts of nature. And when you do a homeopathic diagnosis or a traditional Chinese medicine diagnosis, you're using philosophical ideas and concepts, but they lead to definite, consequences. In homeopathy case, it leads to the prescription of a remedy that fits you like a glove at the mental, emotional, and physical level. And as I like to talk about, addresses existential issues in our lives that when you cannot resolve them, produce symptoms. And Chinese medicine, similarly, if someone takes your case in the acupuncture office, feels your pulse, looks at your tongue, asks you all kinds of questions, will determine something based on deep mind-body principles that will lead to a correct prescription of acupuncture points that balance your energies, and in the course of doing that, enable you to face life's deepest challenges in a more relaxed way. So I like to think of myself as a philosopher of medicine, but again, the medicine, it has to have consequences. By the way, I practiced martial arts for many years, and it's a similar kind of attraction for me in that something like Aikido has deep philosophical principles that if you blend with someone's energy and you accept it and you don't oppose it with direct force, then you can throw the person. Okay, that sounds nice in principle, but the practice involves you're actually able to make that happen. So, and you're leading someone's energy too. You connect with it and you lead it, which is very much like the law of similars in homeopathy, whereby you have to find out exactly what matches a person's state. I'm getting way ahead of things here, but for the audience that doesn't know anything about homeopathy, the principle is of the law of similars, using like to cure like. So when we treat someone with homeopathy, we pick a substance which can be made from a botanical, it could be made from the venom of a bee or an ant or a mineral compound that we have found in research, if it's given to someone, a bunch of healthy people in a gross amount, produces in them exactly the symptoms that that substance would treat in a sick person when that substance has been diluted many, many times and become energetically powerful and then given. So like with the martial arts, you're leading the person's energy, you're blending with it. This is the law of similars. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how interesting this whole topic is.
Definitely.
The remedies are chosen not just to match one by one, whether you have a headache, if it's on the left side or the right side, or if you vomit when you in fresh air, but the practitioner determines what the philosophical issue that's at the core of your problems is, what is troubling you in the world that is leading to those symptoms. And the remedy, when it's understood, actually embodies that issue.
Wow.
So that's a long introduction to your question, but
no, but it's it leaves a lot of questions actually. So it's great. Um, so tell us how did you what drew you to acupuncture and Chinese medicine, traditional medicine, and all that?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, I never wanted to be a doctor, but I did like ideas, as I said.
Hmm.
I was a philosophy student. One day I was practicing Aikido in the dojo in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and someone had posted something on a bulletin board about a talk that this old Chinese doctor was going to be giving. And it was timed well, it was after the Aikido class. And I said, what is this? Acupuncture? This was in 1975, I would say, so
Mm.
76, quite a way back. So I went to this talk, and there was this old Chinese guy, strong accent, but very charismatic, introducing acupuncture. He came from his background was that he came from a very venerable family in China. They've been practicing Chinese medicine for uh, generations. And
Hmm.
he was talking, and I said to myself, my God, if 1/4 of what this guy says is true, that'll completely transform medicine in this country. It's unbelievable what he's talking about. This can't possibly be. I'd never heard of acupuncture before. I knew nothing about it. But
Hmm.
I signed up on the spot for this program at the New England School of Acupuncture, which is what it was then, which was just a classroom in Belmont, Massachusetts. It was a 1-year program, very intense. Since that time, the New England School of Acupuncture has grown exponentially. It's the oldest acupuncture program in the country. It's now affiliated with the Mass College of Pharmacy,
Wow.
and it costs maybe 100 times more to attend it than it cost me. And even then, I had to get a loan from the Knights of Templar to go there.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was
Well.
a fantastic program. He taught us absolutely everything, and it was just overwhelmingly powerful medicine. And even when I went to China years later to
Hmm.
study there, nothing that I learned in China was as powerful as what this particular man taught. And I did acupuncture using his methods for quite a long time
Hmm.
until I decided, well, this is interesting, but it's getting a little mechanical for me. And I wanted to branch out and also be able to treat people long distance. With homeopathy, I can treat children, far off locations, people from far off locations. And my
Right.
joke was, well, I don't have needles long enough to treat you if you're in a different state. So let me take your case and I'll mail you the remedy.
Right.
But it was also more interesting than that. Chinese medicine and homeopathy are kin, but
Hmm.
but philosophically, homeopathy is more interesting to me at this time.
And that led you to then writing books and 6 books.
Yes.
Yes.
People would often ask me, gee, what's the difference between, can I do acupuncture while I'm having homeopathy? Can I have homeopathy while I'm doing acupuncture? What's the difference between these two approaches? They're both
Hmm.
highly energetic. They both exploit the body's native irritability. That's a funny thing to say, I know. When I was in junior high school, I had a teacher who said, you know, there's no definition of life that would exclude the idea that living things are irritable. You poke them and they react. I said, what's okay? That sounds pretty funny. But actually, this simple idea really is borne out. If you think of acupuncture as a mini stabbing,
Right.
which provokes a reaction from on the meridian system to be balanced,
Hmm.
there's that. In homeopathy, you can think of as a mini poisoning, because you're using a substance that would evoke a toxic reaction if it was given in a gross amount to healthy people. So
Hmm.
both these systems at one very simple level, what they do is they exploit the body's irritability. But of course, it's a lot more interesting than that. It's a lot deeper than that. And having my background in Chinese medicine enabled me to create a system that would synthesize the wisdom of both the East in Chinese medicine and the West in homeopathy and in biomedicine, and see how all these pieces fit together. Is there some system that can explain illness to people that synthesize these kinds of wisdoms? And that did not exist at that time. So that resulted in my first book, which is called Interpreting Chronic Illness: The Convergence of Traditional Chinese Medicine, Homeopathy, and Biomedicine, which is over here, this book. Whoops.
Okay. That's good.
So that was what kicked things off. I felt very compelled to write that, and once I wrote that, it just seemed like, oh, I kind of like writing books. And
Hmm.
when the the muse struck me and I thought I had something to say, I would put pen to paper and write something else.
Very good. Very good. So you went from that book to the other books, but do you want to talk about
Yeah,
each
I
one
guess
of
so. I
them,
mean,
or?
yeah, sure. I'll go through them pretty quickly. The
Mhm.
second book I wrote was called The Toxic Relationship Cure: Clearing Traumatic Damage from a Boss, Parent, Lover, or Friend with Natural Drug-Free Remedies. You know, when you explain homeopathy to people, sometimes their eyes glaze over because you say, well, I'm not looking, I don't care about your diagnosis. I've got to take your whole case. I've got to do a constitutional intake. I'm going to ask you all kinds of weird questions. People's
Right.
eyes sometimes glaze over. But what I did with this book is I said, you know, we get traumatized by our parents. We are traumatized by betrayals and friends and love relationships. Our bosses can make a mess of our lives. And each of these situations has a parallel with a remedy that can really directly address that particular kind of trauma. Of
Mhm.
course, it doesn't start there. Usually the table has been set earlier on in childhood, what makes you susceptible to certain kinds of situations. But this is a very accessible book, and it gives people the opportunity to learn homeopathy in a more familiar way. You know, everybody has been traumatized. So what's
Mhm.
the remedy for somebody who has, you know, a bullying boss, or a pair of parents that put you down endlessly, or where you've been betrayed, you know, in love relationships?
Right.
It's just the beginning, but it's actually the book is told through anecdotes, parables, I would say,
Mm.
which contain all the keynotes of a particular remedy, and it allowed me to express part of my creative side. I like writing fiction too,
Mhm.
and it's an instructive book, but probably the most accessible one I wrote. And then after that,
Mhm.
oh, okay, then I got into well, the autism, 10 years back, the autism epidemic came out of nowhere,
Mhm.
and suddenly this is really quite a challenge to everyone, but it's in particular to homeopaths who suddenly found themselves being inundated by families with autistic children. And I went to Holland and I studied with some physicians there who were making breakthroughs in the treatment of autism. And after working with that for 5 years, I decided to put together my knowledge of that and some case histories, and I wrote out this book called Autism Reversal Toolbox: Strategies, Remedies, Resources. Um, this is mainly for practitioners, but some of the parents with autistic children became really quite knowledgeable, and they could make use of this book as well.
Okay.
And then um, I decided to take it easy, and I wrote a funny book, but it's actually a serious book in disguise, which is under a pseudonym, Chaim Yankel, called Heymischer Homeopathy. And this exploits Yiddish Kvetches. Yiddish is a very colorful language, very funny language,
Mhm.
but the way people complain in Yiddish, and you don't need to know Yiddish, it's all translated. The rubrics also invite um, homeopathic remedies. So there are 150 remedies described in this book, but it's full of cartoons and anecdotes and jokes that are aimed to instruct what the remedies are about. Just to give you an idea, for example, the word bubkis, very funny word.
Mhm.
I got bubkis. In
Mhm.
Yiddish, it simply means goat shit, but it's a way of saying I got nothing. I'm as poor as hell. And that remedy would instantly connote a remedy called serenum from
Right.
homeopathy, which is all about poverty consciousness.
Okay.
So I wrote that, and then I don't know. Maybe I should stop talking about books. You have some questions for me, and I'll
No,
maybe go
no,
back to
no.
that.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll go back
All right.
to the right.
Then okay. Then after that, probably the book. If the audience is going to buy something that's meaningful and really makes a difference,
Mhm.
a book that I felt extremely compelled to write. I really couldn't have gone through my life without writing it. It's called Sane Asylums: The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. And
Mhm.
what this is, to me, it's an embarrassment that a non-physician, non-historian wrote this. Because you imagine, let's say you were the only person who knew about the War of 1812.
Right.
Absolutely nobody wanted to talk about it. It was just something inconvenient to people. Just didn't want to talk about it. But you knew everything about it. You knew everything about it.
Mhm.
You would want to write that book. Okay, so something similar here. 150 years these amazing homeopathic mental hospitals proliferated and flourished in the United States. Plus, there were thousands of homeopathic pharmacies, many, many more homeopathic hospitals, and medical schools too. But the asylums in particular were incredibly important, and they were utopias. And given the problems we're having with mental health now, the fact that this information has been suppressed is really rather tragic, because there really are alternatives to what is being done at the psychiatric level for people. We have, the United States has very, 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 very poor record treating psychiatric conditions. There's a lot of unhappiness about mental health in this country. And there are numerous, even the New York Times the other day had a gigantic article about a woman who just got completely fed up with her psychiatric care and has led a movement to get people off medications. They just made her sick for years. And she figured out that her problem was not psychiatric, her problem was the drugs. But people think they have no alternative, but homeopathy offers fantastic alternatives for mental health. And in the history of these asylums that I wrote about, you get a clear idea of that, and you get a sense of the possibilities that existed had a different road been followed than what we did. The problem with homeopathic remedies is that they are not patentable. In other words, no one's making any money on them. They're in the public domain. There are pharmacies that make them, but the point of those pharmacies is not to make a killing and to recapture all the millions of dollars that have been invested is into a psychiatric product, but just to help people, and homeopaths can access them. And that is responsible for the big kibosh on homeopathy, the constant campaign by the conventional community against this, and which has also created the censorship program around this information. People are not supposed to know about it. So if you want to get a sense of something quite amazing, pick this book up. Mary Todd Lincoln, for example, Abraham Lincoln's widow, was probably cured of her madness by homeopathy. And that's another story that's never been told, which I tell about here. The Middletown Hospital in New York, this is more fun part of the whole thing, which was the mother church of that movement, run by a fantastic psychiatrist by the name of Selden Talcott. He used baseball to improve the mental health of his clients. He found that when they watched baseball games, that their state of mind was vastly improved. And he created this powerhouse baseball team at the Middletown Hospital that actually played major league teams. That's a great story too. There was a nurse there by the name of Clara Barris, who wrote an amazing nursing book called Nursing the Insane, which is maybe the best holistic nursing book ever written. So I strove to give her due. And that kind of stuff is in that book. But the basic thing is that it reveals a history that you're not supposed to know about. And if you did know about it, it would really open your eyes and make you think about the possibilities for people with mental health problems that are different from what we're being offered.
And what directed you to write these books, in particular this one?
Yeah, this one. Well, it did occur to me that there just wasn't enough written about homeopathic history, or more importantly, it was being written by the wrong people. Johns Hopkins Press, for example, has caused a lot of mischief with the one book about homeopathy that I recall it being put out in the 1970s, which in the very title described homeopathy as a heresy. It was something that was very, very unimportant, a complete lie, and the consequences of this are very bad. Homeopathic history is not taught in any homeopathic medical school anywhere. Not to mention, if it's referred to in this offhand, incorrect way. So the consequences of that are bad. I thought there should be a book about the homeopathic hospitals in general, but that was just a huge topic. I couldn't believe how many there were and what a gigantic topic it was. And so I narrowed it down to the mental hospitals, these asylums, which I call sane asylums. They were utopias. They were self-sustaining. They offered arts and crafts. They had gardens. The patients were treated very respectfully. They got what was called moral care and also moral hygiene at the hands of people like Clara Barris, who trained the nurses to be just wonderful caregivers. It wasn't just custodial care. You weren't just thrown in there and left to rot. and
Right.
people could stay there because it was an asylum for quite some time until they recovered. Nobody was kicked out into the community, drugged up.
Mm.
These are wonderful places, and I'd say self-sustaining utopias. I thought that story needed to be told, and when I started working on it, my God, it just wrote itself. As I say, I discovered this whole history about Mary Todd Lincoln and her trial, where she was condemned as incurably mentally ill, and the
Mhm.
suppression of the story, whereby she was very likely cured by homeopathy. I just couldn't help it.
Oh,
I
oh,
could not help writing that book. So each book I write is something that I'd want to read by myself.
right.
And you talk to writers, I know I'm not alone in that. People don't write when they don't want to write.
Mm. Now, the stories that you came up with and you uncovered, was it one of those that you uncovered by accident, or you were looking for something and it just people were telling you, or?
Well, this particular book, it was an adventure involving, going back into the 1800s and finding
Mhm.
all the old textbooks. There's a couple of publishing houses that have, at University of Michigan, there are a couple of places that are republishing these old classics, like Selden Talcott's book on treating homeopathy, the mentally ill with homeopathy. The books do exist.
Mm.
I may have been the only one buying them at that time. And my investigation was objective. I really did not know what I was going to discover.
Right.
Um, uh, and I didn't have an agenda particularly. I really wanted to find out what was going on. So, as I say, the topic taught me what it wanted to express. And this is what happens. You write a book, but that's not quite how it works. The book starts writing you, telling you
Mm.
what it wants to express. And I do feel like a number of these famous old homeopaths were looking over my shoulder and propelling me forward to tell these stories that had been forbidden to tell.
Mhm. And imagine if this country would have continued doing that instead of going to the barbaric type of treatments.
Well, then you should read the last chapter of that book, which is called it's that's exactly the question that I addressed. Um, it's called Investing in Sanity, and
Mhm.
it includes what I would call a fever dream about exactly an answer to your question, what that would look like if these asylums came back. Mind you, it's not easy because people lived there.
Mhm.
Who do you know that wants to live in full time in an asylum in the country here? Um, every one of them, even the best asylums,
Right.
the staff go home at night. I don't know. I don't know how they run exactly, but it's not the way those old asylums worked.
Right.
But I would, staff them with acupuncturists and Reiki practitioners and all kinds of spiritual people, kind of people that you have on your show, Glenda.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Take a look at that chapter sometime. People should read the chapter on investing in sanity, which is
Mm.
the idea that people can recover, that their problems are not incurable, that they're not just because they get labeled with a condition like psychosis or uh, um, bipolar number 3 or 4 or 5, that these are just conditions that need to be managed. This is absolute nonsense. Mental illness is an existential problem. We get into those situations through extreme kinds of traumas, but you can bring people out of them, as the people in those asylums did. The homeopaths and the nurses there cured people routinely, and there are case histories of it. Another way of looking at this is, completely possible. But unfortunately, it's money that drives everything in our healthcare system, which is
Mhm.
horribly broken and denies people the opportunity to engage with life in a meaningful kind of way. And if they're having trouble, finding what's important in that condition, what is it leading you to learn, and how to develop, as opposed to just being treated as somebody with this diagnosis,
Mm.
labeled on them. It's a horrible way to be. Horrible way to be.
Yes, it makes the person feel like they're not even a human anymore, because they just put a stamp a label on you, and that's how they treat you. And could be 10 different things, or it could appear as it's that type of diagnosis, but it could be something completely different. Um, from even other illnesses, not just mental illness, but even autoimmune system
Yeah.
illnesses. You see a lot of people that get diagnosed, say, with lupus, and they really don't have lupus. They have something that's similar to it, but they treat it like if it was lupus and the person ends up being sicker. Because
Well, here's the thing, Glenda. In homeopathy, in the conventional world,
Mhm,
we have this word normal and abnormal, and the
mhm,
assumption is that we all are alike. What matters is how we're all alike, and any deviation from that produces the abnormal. And the abnormal you can label various kinds of ways, and then okay, you've got your diagnosis, and now we know what to do. But in homeopathy, exactly the opposite is true. What matters is not the commonality, but how we're different. You and I are roughly the same size and shape. We have the same number of organs. We're put together, in many ways that are similar. But that's not important as far as, at least not as far as homeopathy is concerned in prescribing something. Your life history has its own trajectories and very specific things happen to you. And even if you were diagnosed with lupus, and
mhm,
it's funny, I just got someone today who was suspected of having, I would put it in quotation mark, lupus.
mhm,
Um, I have to do my own investigation, see, well, okay, fine, that's a label. But what's
mhm.
going on with this person? What exactly is the stress that is producing these symptoms in this particular woman, given her history? And there are quite a number of remedies that can address that. As the defining fact is not whether it's lupus or not, but what
Right.
fits this person. And I have treated, again, people with that labeling, with many different remedies. And any homeopath will tell you that. Someone can come in with a diagnosis. 5 people can come in with exactly the same diagnosis and get entirely different remedies. Or they might have completely different conditions and get the same remedy because at some deep level, the same theme is being expressed at the level of the vital force.
Right. Right. Very good. It's the same thing as, like with Reiki, where people say, "Oh, well, how can you just give Reiki and know what to give?" I said, "I don't. I just become the conduit, send it out, and the body will know. The body
Yeah,
will tell me where to spend more time."
yeah, yeah.
So, and every person could have the exact same backache, yet one could be from their knee, the other one could be because they stomped their foot, you know, and they're just overcompensating. So that was your next to last book. And what was your last book?
The last book, okay, was actually a sequel to my very first book.
Oh,
And
okay.
this last book is called The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, Homeopathy for Existential Stress. So I told you before that in my first book, I created a synthesis between
Mhm.
Chinese medicine and biomedicine and homeopathy. What I left out, what I didn't figure out till quite a few years later, in homeopathy, we have this notion of miasms. So the miasm represents the presence of a significant illness that runs through the population and leaves traces on the descendants. These are homeopathic miasms. There are 5 classical miasms. And not surprisingly, at least to me, that hooks up with the 5 elements or 5 phases in traditional Chinese medicine, which was my template for connecting these different kinds of medicines. Well, anyway, what I did in this book is I found the existential meaning behind the miasms and how that also connected to the Chinese medicine understanding of the 5 phases. And I just started describing the remedies, cataloging the remedies, and accordingly, like that. As I say, I'm a philosopher, but it has consequences. When you can do that, you can actually facilitate prescribing. The ideas become more similar, more familiar, and the remedies are able to be organized. But also, I think the 5 existential questions, which are rooted, represent our entire existence.
Mhm.
Even if you don't want to do homeopathy or Chinese medicine, I think they're interesting enough in themselves. I can tell you what they are and see
Please.
if people relate to them, and without going into detail about what they are. But there are 5 core existential questions. By the way, existentialism is a word that's coming back into the fore, right? People
Mhm.
talk about the existential threat of climate change, the fact that we might have a world war on our hands, um, all kinds of tough stuff going on these days. They say,
Mhm.
"Why, that's an existential threat." But what the word really means is, it has to do with not just, oh my God, we're going to die, but the fact that we want life to have meaning.
Right.
There's certain questions which are very, very deep, but they don't have quick answers. What they have is, instead of this emotional charge that prompts a creative response in us and maybe prompts the entire direction of our life,
Mhm.
you're not going to get a definitive, it's not a definitive answer to it, but there's something that you can do, or you're going to do either creatively or through taking a homeopathic remedy that will enable you to work your way through it. And even if you never answer the question, you'll get some perspective about it. Anyway, here are the 5 existential questions that I came up with that connect with the remedies and also with Chinese medicine. The first one is, am I alone in life, or do I act in synchrony with nature and with others? That's one. The second one is my presence in the world sustainable?
Mm.
The third one is, am I oriented in space and time? And this has implications for our sense of identity, of who we are. And again, I'm just going to give you the question. I'm not going to give you the whole background behind these things. By the way, each of these questions lines up with our 5 senses too. I guess I could say that.
Yes.
So the first question, do I act in synchrony with nature myself? That is an expression of what I call the sense dimension of touch. Is my presence in the world sustainable? That relates to the sense dimension of taste and metabolism. Am I oriented in space and time? Relates to the sense dimension of smell. And I'm not going to explain why that is, but it's in some levels it's intuitive, but it's all completely played out in these books. The fourth one is, and now it gets sort of heavier. Can the boundary between life and death be abided? And that's a very familiar kind of existential thing. Oh my God, what's on the other side? Am I going to die? What's the meaning of my life if I'm just going to be snuffed out? But it's more complex than that. And that relates to hearing, the sense dimension of hearing.
Okay.
Why that is, again, I don't have time to go into. The fifth one is a question that we often would ask at the very end of our life. And that question is, will the insurrection of my birth prove fruitful? And I'll say something about that. You know, when we're born, the world is going on perfectly fine. It's going on perfectly well without us. Suddenly we come into the world. And the birth is kind of an insurrection against the status quo. The world has to deal with you now. You're here, and you've got your own destiny, and you're going to do things, and you're going to impact the world. The world will not be the same when you're here and when you leave. So at the end, the question is, was my insurrection fruitful or not? And this relates to the sense dimension of sight. So I'm making a lot of correspondences here that are fleshed out in these books, particularly this last one, The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness. But those are not light questions, but they're important, and we all ask them. At one level, we don't even know we're asking those questions when we make our way through life. But every one of those questions is something that we deal with. And sometimes one of them is a particularly prominent role to play in our life. And when that happens, certain remedies are conjured that pertain to that particular question. And those are the remedies that a homeopath like myself will focus on. One of those is what you'll get to help you resolve that quandary is attached to that question.
That's very interesting. It does make you wonder, even just the questions and the senses that you.
I'll give one more dimension to that, because the questions actually express a quandary. So we'll give you the quandary. Well, maybe I'll skip that. It just gets too heavy. But the things like create in the sense dimension of sight, for example, it's all about anger. Now, anger, we think sometimes we'll have a guru who says, get rid of your anger. You shouldn't be angry. That's not how I look at it. Anger is a tool that should solve a problem. It should banish an affront. It should solve a problem. The problem with anger is not that it exists, but that we do not have creative solutions to it. The challenge within the sense, what I call the sense dimension of sight, is to convert our anger into creativity. And why I say that, that's not just my invention. That's deeply ingrained in Chinese medicine. Within the element of wood, which pertains to the sense dimension of sight, that's about springtime. That's about change. Like the little buds that come up in the spring have to use their anger to break through the soil. And this dimension is about rebirth. It's about the liver. In Chinese medicine, the liver is extremely important. It's not just a physical organ. It's an organ about circulation in the body in general. It's about anger, and you have to find a way to express the anger and not to suppress it. The liver is never deficient. But it does get in excess, and then you don't want it to be constrained in that excess. So it has to express itself. So anyway, yeah, the question is, at the level of one level, is the insurrection of my birth fruitful, which is all about whether your life had a visionary quality or not, but also did I in general in my life convert my anger into creative action, or did I lash out blindly? It's interesting when people say they go blind with rage. They never say they go deaf with rage or lose their sense of smell with rage. Things that get into language are very meaningful. These relationships don't get embedded idiomatically unless they have a deep truth attached to them. So that's one example.
Very interesting, because I learned early in life that the energy I created when I was angry, I could use it for something. Whether it be at one point I was actually using that anger, that I was angry at somebody I knew, to do some demolition in my house while I was uh, remodeling it. So it was very interesting that it's connected. And I always said, well, I just want to use that energy for something good. I mean, it's the same. It's the fuel that you have, so you might as well use it for something that you can create, or something that you can use it for in a more positive way, instead of revenge and all that other stuff, which takes so much more energy
Yeah,
in my view.
I mean,
So,
as an example, just continue with this because I refer to the sense dimension of sight. This is just not my discovery. In Chinese
right.
medicine, the eyes, right,
Mhm.
are what call the opening of wood, or the opening of the liver. So
Right.
the eyes and liver are connected. So if you go to an acupuncturist and your eyes are red, acupuncture is not going to say, let me examine this redness here. Let me see what's connecting there. We'll automatically know that you have an anger problem. Automatically. Automatically you'll get red,
Right.
because look at how language works. When you see red, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's so obvious but it's not considered, you don't want to connect mind and body in conventional diagnoses. Oh no, that's for
Right.
the psychologist. But it's really very obvious. If you go to an acupuncturist and you lose stools, the
Hmm.
acupuncturist will automatically know you're worrying too much.
Hmm.
Automatically. If it's the other way around, if you're a brooder, if you're worried about stuff, the acupuncturist will pay particular attention to your bowels.
Hmm.
You know, it's hardwired, that connection. The lungs and grief, for example, sadness.
Hmm.
When you sob, your lungs shake. Basically, this energy goes through there. It's not
Right.
mysterious. If you had a big grief, if you have um, uh, lung cancer of some sort, the acupuncturist will automatically ask about in detail whether you've had any significant griefs in your life. And if you've resolved them, just having grief doesn't condemn you to something. It's a
Right.
question of whether you've resolved it in some way, that you've gotten someplace with it. And there are lots of remedies in homeopathy um, that help you to process your grief. It's not a matter of erasing them, but helping you to encounter them and move forward. There are many people who have said that our illnesses result from suppression of our feelings. We have to vent them. We have to face our
Hmm.
demons. Certainly, homeopaths and Chinese medicine people are not the only ones who point those things out. It's
Right.
well known. But we have the best tools for doing it, well beyond just talk therapy.
Right. Right. Because sometimes it does create all that built-in anger, for example, does create a chemical change in your body also.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
whether, and you just may need some um, Chinese traditional medicine to set it back in place,
that's right.
restart it, balance it back into what it should be.
That's right.
Right. So now I see you have a lot of interesting specialties, like you practice in pediatrics and mental illness, autism, autoimmune conditions, and infertility. Um, Very broad, uh, a range of things that you practice in. Now, is that because they're similar in some way, or is it, I know in traditionally person says, oh no, mental illness is not the same thing as infertility, but can infertility cause some type of mental illness or mental dysfunction because of the
Yeah, the
trauma?
answer is really quite simple. I mean, in homeopathy, it's one-stop shopping. We don't even, I said we're not invested in this, in the diagnoses. We're also not particularly interested in the different systems. You know, there's a funny thing. When psychiatrists went to China in the early 1900s and tried to convince the Chinese that there was such a thing as psychiatry, they were laughed at. I said, "What are you talking about? Chinese medicine, what you're describing, we have a method for dealing that. We don't need a separate category for psychiatry."
Mm-hmm.
But easiest would be if you spent like a few months with me in my office and saw how I worked. You'd
Right.
see it's exactly the same method. If someone comes with an infertility problem, I don't say, "Oh, this is an infertility issue." I again take their case, try to
Mm-hmm.
find out what the key traumas were in their life, find out what's going on. A remedy that really works for someone's infertility, in the same remedy, may help someone else's depression, even though they came to me for different things. We have to discover the secret that's going on in that person, that's creating the problem. The same issue in one person can produce, an infertile issue. In other words, could produce a completely different set of problems. But the method we use is the same. We take someone's case. So if you came to see me,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be asking about your background. I would be asking how you're famous in your family, what stories were told about you. No matter who you were, what you came for, a key question I then ask at some point after I take a catalog of all your physical symptoms
Mm-hmm.
is this: what's your hot button? What's the situation you're most uncomfortable in? What will provoke a reaction in you? And when your hot button is pushed, what do? Do you write a poem? Do you lash out? Do you get drunk? Do you slam a door? Do you go for a long walk? Um, that's an incredibly important question because it cuts to
Mm-hmm.
the chase, and how people are individual, and how we become uncomfortable is one very important question as to what can lead me to a remedy. And I'll ask that question regardless of what someone's coming in for, whether they have an autoimmune condition, even if it's a child. I want to find out. I'll ask the parents, okay, the child is tantruming. Tell me exactly what happened before the child started tantruming. I'm not going to say, what does a pediatrician call this?
Right.
I'm
Right.
not interested in that. I want the concrete aspect of it, the actual details. So I like when people tell me stories. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why in my second book, which is the Toxic Relationship Cure, I give
Mm-hmm.
the stories. I give the stories people tell me. And then I pull out of that the remedy that I think applies based on the specifics of the story, not the diagnosis. So that's
Right.
the homeopathic method. We try to connect the dots between their physical, mental, and emotional symptoms. And there's going to be some remedy that we know very well, which actually embodies all of those things. And this is a very abstract discussion, Glenda. Best would be if I had the time to actually explain a remedy like sepia or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
see exactly how it manifests mentally, emotionally, and physically, and how that embodies a Chinese diagnosis, and how it would be expressed in a conventional disease. That would be the most instructive thing I could do. But that would
Oh,
be kind of a seminar.
well, maybe we'll have you back for that seminar. Because this is very interesting to me. You are trying to get to the root of what it's been causing them all the the, the clients all their problems and their reactions to things and how they live and how they don't live, instead of just putting a band-aid on it, on the
I could
symptoms.
give, if we have 10 minutes, I think
Yeah,
maybe it would make sense to tell you one remedy and just
go ahead.
unpack it
Perfect.
for you. So the remedy is sepia, which is made from the ink of the cuttlefish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this comes up for women quite a bit. Women who have, I mean, women go through a couple of, actually 5 very significant psychosexual stages that really affect their identity. So the first,
Mm-hmm.
men go through something like that, but nowhere near as powerfully as women do. So I would say puberty is a very, very big deal for a girl. The first sexual experience is a very, very big deal for a girl. So is marriage. Okay, males have some version of that, but it's not as defining as for girls. Now, pregnancy, men have absolutely nothing like that, although there's weird discussions going on these days about that. um, uh, and then menopause on the other end. So with each of those stages, you go through it's not just a physical change, but your entire sense of identity goes different. If any of those stages don't go well, it's confusing. Who am I? Kind of thing that happens. Sepia is a remedy that comes up. Here's a very simple example of it. You know, the myth that they lived happily ever after they got married. Well, sepia is sort of the story comes up when the reverse is true. Yeah, you get married, you get romanced, you get flowers, a lot of good sex, like wonderful things happen. And then bit by bit, a child comes along, then a second child, you stop paying less attention to each other as a married couple. You kind of start going through the motions, and this feeling starts to build that you're just a slave of the household. Now, the sepia state, someone will come, they'll bloat after they eat. They'll always be bloating. They'll start to become sarcastic. They'll start to mix up words. If they're not menopausal, their periods will be very painful. All kinds of skin conditions will erupt. But the most distressing thing that a sepia woman would say is that sometimes I feel like I don't even love my children. I feel flattened out. I just don't care about anything. I mean, she still tries. Now, that remedy will attract somebody who's what I would call a natural woman, like the way Aretha Franklin sings about it. Somebody who likes to dance, loves to dance. Sepia women love to dance. They love to they're invested in the future, things going on. But then life has happened and they've reached their limit, and this particular strength has now been inverted. It's been harmed. And in Chinese medicine, this would be called liver constraint disorder. The liver, which wants the energy to move very smoothly throughout the body, is now congested because from resentment. It's resentment which has become entrenched, but it's not permanent. She's still optimistic. So she becomes sarcastic. And the sarcasm is kind of a tribute of the negative side of her personality to what used to be the most positive side. The stomach itself is sarcastic, right? She eats something and suddenly it bloats. It's like the stomach is saying, oh yeah, I'm really getting what I need here. I'm really getting what I need. And I'll put it this way, this is the actual core issue, which is existential in sepia. Hope becomes toxic. Think about that. People are always hopeful. That's one of the watchwords of mental health. Even if you're on the gallows, if you're not in a sepia state, you would say, well, maybe I'm going to a better place. But when hope becomes toxic, that flattens you out. And every time you hope, you got to squash it down. And you say, okay, I've squashed my hope down. I'm not going to hope anymore. Things are okay. Oh, damn it, I hoped. And you got to do it again and again and again. And that dynamic is the dynamic of sepia. And so someone will come to me in that state with skin problems, with digestive problems, with hormonal problems, but this depression, which is part and parcel of it, feeling flattened out. And then when you give, and the bad relations with a husband because she's snappy at him, and he's not surprisingly going to have a hard time with her. That dynamic is not helped by being in that state. Right. Now, people in that state will go endlessly to psychotherapy. They'll try to change their diets. But there's going to be nothing that helps this person as much as a dose of the remedy sepia. Now, sepia is the ink of the cuttlefish. Now, let me play this metaphor out for you, because in homeopathy land, the metaphors become absolutely literal. What the cuttlefish does when it's threatened is it squirts ink into the water, right? Okay, now the predator cannot see the cuttlefish. The cuttlefish can't see where it is either. So the metaphor is the waters are muddied. Going back to the first thing I said about sepia, whereby these various change states revolving puberty and first sexual experience and marriage and childbirth and menopause, someone who's in that state, the waters are muddy. They don't know who they are anymore. And that's why they mix up words too. They'll so that's a very global understanding of this one particular remedy and the kind of universe of symptoms that invokes it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Very interesting. I'm definitely intrigued even more. I mean, I was before with Chinese medicine and homeopathic traditions and all that, but this definitely sounds like you're really getting to the root of things.
Oh, by the way, there's many things about sepia I left out. It's called a portal remedy, which means it has a tremendous impact on the blood. Well, guess what? the function of the liver in Chinese medicine, which, as I said, is this is a condition of liver constraint, is to govern the blood in Chinese medicine. So that's why it becomes disorganized in the sepia state. Also, it's a major remedy for hot flashes because the liver congests, and like a compost heat, sends heat up into the head. So it's a major remedy for people who have hot flashes. Not the only one by any chance, but when these other things come into play, where there is a history of resentment that has been suppressed and disappointment, where the person is also basically, an optimistic woman. All these things have to be connected through this remedy. But yeah, the liver governs the blood in Chinese medicine, and so that blood function is reflected in the materia medica of sepia.
Wow. This is such an interesting subject, and I am sorry we only have an hour, because I would have loved to continue talking about this. Maybe if you can at some point, you would like to come back. We are almost out of time. Is there anything else you would like to leave our audience with? In the meantime, I'll put your website up so they can find you.
Yeah.
And it's also in the description, so they can definitely find you there and find your books. So
Good. Yeah.
So thank you again. And anything else that you want to say?
I would urge people to get a hold of, if they want to find out what's gone wrong with mental health in this country, read Sane Asylums. If you want a nice introduction to homeopathy from the point of view of something, very understandable, from traumas relating to your boss, your lover, your family member, get a hold of the Toxic Relationship Cure. If you want a deeper dive into the existential issues that homeopathy can resolve, read my last book, The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness. You want to engage in dialogue with me, send me an email, ask me questions. I'll be happy to do that. But there's a lot of work we need to do to overthrow to really put a dent into this very discouraging paradigm we have that of pharmaceutical medicine is giving us, that we're condemned to these diagnoses, and all we can do is manage our chronic illnesses and take endless tests, and then more and more drugs. If you go to Europe and you bring your medical chart, they're going to say, "What the hell? Why are you taking all these medications?" They can't believe it. The doctors in Europe, even the conventional ones, cannot believe what we're doing in this country. We're taking way, way too many medicines, not just the psychiatric ones, in particular those.
Right. No, it's obvious. We overdo it over here. So, well, I wanted to thank you and thank our audience. And please remember to share and, be kind to each other. Have a great week. And as always, we love you. Hold on for a second. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. Thank you, Matt.